In this episode, we're going to have a look at planning the training tasks, a little bit of reading RASP. Cross-country techniques then. Of course, quite often when we go cross-country, in the very early days, we spend a huge amount of our time doing navigation and wondering where we're going to land instead of learning the cross-country techniques. So what we want to do is some kind of training, cross-country training, without landing out. And so we want an exercise where known turning points are relevant. So here we have known turning points. They're scattered around, usually a few as a start point near our home airfield, and then it'll be quite some way before we go to another turning point. And of course our thermals, wherever they are invariably not in a good position for our turning points. So what we can do is put concentric rings on. So here we have a 2 kilometre wide training circle around home base. It's easy for navigation. You will never land out, and you can do pure cross-country training and concentrate purely on that and really very little else. So here we have a notional 10 kilometre circle, plus or minus 1 kilometre. So go out to it and start flying around it. So we start off at the airfield and just fly out to join the 10 kilometre circle. Here's our first thermal. We climb up here, and as we look ahead, we can see a couple of thermals ahead, about 10 kilometres away from the airfield. So perhaps we bounce along one, through the next one, and on to the third. And that third one, we will still have enough height to run home if it doesn't work. But today is favourable, it's worked, we've climbed at the question mark at the moment, and so now we can get towards cloud base, and we've got another decision to make. As we look ahead, we can see thermals ahead, and so we can go with the same concept of joining the thermals together and to climb at the end one. Again, if we weren't to climb at that last one with the exclamation mark, well then we'd simply run home and land. But at least in the meantime we have done some cross-country training. Could be that when we get there though, that looking at the continued 10 kilometre arc, the weather is not very good. And of course if we were on a classic cross-country, we'd be then in a bit of a quandary. Do we run home? Do we go backwards? Or do we press on with the inevitable land out in a field? A decision has got to be made, and when we're early in our cross-country learning, we're invariably not very happy about pressing on into weather that we don't quite understand or we're uncertain about. And so we don't want to do that. However, we find that there's a thermal much further round the circle that if we fly direct to, there's a reasonable chance we can get there. So in this diagram here, we can see it's probably about 12 kilometres away, and we could probably cruise over there. And again, if it didn't work, we can still turn around and land back home. So over we go, and that's fine. Lo and behold, when we get there, we climb, and we can carry on going round in our arc. So essentially, we are learning how to fly cross-country. All the skill drills that we've just covered in the previous episode as well, we can plan to practice any of those whilst we're doing this. In other words, we're self-learning practical cross-country techniques, and we're learning the real essence of climbing efficiently, cruising efficiently, making our plan, and not having to worry about Farmer Brown's field. Of course, we can do local skill drills on not necessarily a circle, but we could put it on a box or a square, and we could make any kind of make our own turning points if that's what we wanted to do. So this particular one is based on Husbands Bosworth. I only put this in because the turning points are already there. So there's Husbos, MAH, Market Harborough, Ra, Crick, Nay, Pitt and Watt. And so again, from here we've got a smaller shape and a bigger box, a smaller box and a bigger box that we can fly around quite happily. The concentric 2-kilometre training circles then can also become a distance handicap task. Again, it's easy navigation and no landouts. It's a handicapped rolling cat's cradle effectively. So here we have perhaps the K6 type of glider with just 6 or 8 kilometres going around. Here we have our austere, here we have our discus, here are our higher performance machines and so on. And all that happens is that the gliders that are got a higher performance have got to do a bigger arc. But at the same time, they will all have the same kind of datum height of running home. Let's say it's 1,500 feet. So if at any stage you're on the arc at 1,500 feet, you are to simply run home and land. So this becomes an unlimited turning point, effectively. Distance is only scored for the distance completed around and beyond your arc band. There's no flying below a safe glide home height of, say, 1,500 feet, but you can nominate whatever as your safety height. So here we've got our handicap gliders. 70 to 79 are going to operate at the 6 to 8 kilometre band, but bear in mind one lap is still 44 kilometres, and if you do it at 8 kilometres radius, then actually you've effectively done a 50 kilometre silver distance, but never being more than 8 or so kilometres away from home. Of course, if you want to do a bigger task, simply do more laps. Cat's cradle then, or a round robin, and we can modify the turning points a little bit with the wind. So we can appreciate that if the wind here is from the lower right, then we can push a little bit further there for the same chicken height to run home, because the wind will carry us that little bit downwind back to home. So we can use any kind of local feature that you want, so we don't have to put it into an expensive piece of sat-nav kit. We can use a simple map, and it can be hilltops and villages and road junctions and so on. So we can set off. Normally on this kind of task we'd start at home, climb up, and as we climb we drift, so the first turning point is probably a downwind turning point. But of course we can go to any turn point that we so desire. The point is that we go where the weather is good, so we're still achieving a task, although we haven't declared exactly which order of turning points we're going to do. We can make it a task going a lapped task, or we can go diagonally cross at any point and crisscross from one side to the other if that's what you desire to do. Here's another task. Now this particular map here is from Spine, and there are sort of some advantages that we can pin these tasks on the map, and it gives us information that we might want. There's a bigger task and there's a slightly smaller task. Even a triangle. Another kind of task would be an arrowhead task. So we're doing a triangle, and we can see again that we're not much more than 10 kilometers away from home at any one stage, and yet here we're talking about a reasonable distance, some 60 kilometers or a little bit more. Okay, And as a little club task, it could be quite good because you can see how people are doing. So you set off from A and go off down to B, and these distances here are distance handicapped. So you could set people off together as a pair, even though they're dissimilar performances, and again you would expect them to come round the grandstand A again, and that whichever is in the lead is the winner of that pair or that trio if they all set off together. But again, you're never outside glide angle of staying home. Now that can be good for a whole host of tasks. For example, when we had extensive foot and mouth disease and we couldn't go cross country, this kind of task would be perfectly good, and it's still a racing task. However, from a training point of view, it's also a good task. As you can see, you're learning into-wind, downwind and crosswind tasking, and you're still concentrating on the gliding rather than the navigation and looking for somewhere safe to land. The shape is anything you like, and you can narrow it down in that way or flatten it out a bit. When we do mountain tasking then, it would be foolhardy to consider landing in fields. And so to help people, then what we have is arcs of radius from known landable airfields within the mountains. So this is Italy, and it's just very easy. You never set off from one place towards another unless you're guaranteeing that you are changing your diversion airfield, and you can always make it. And there is absolutely no reason why you don't adopt this kind of planning technique in the UK, especially when there are so many gliding sites and landable areas in our country. So here we go for planning our task. So we planned already, and we can see on our decision making. So here we are on the bottom left at the turn point, and we can see 3 thermal sources ahead, but we also know and can see 15-20 kilometers ahead a significant number of landable fields. But on this particular leg, there's very little chance of making it to the airfield in the right of the screen, lower right of the screen, but we have planned another turn point up to the northeast of the screen. So here comes our glide around the turn point. So we know plan A is to rumble along and climb at one of those thermals, and really our plan D, i.e. destination, if it all goes wrong, we know we're going to be sufficiently high to find a suitable field in an area of landable fields. So we feel confident that we are still flying safely. We run along here, and fortuitously we get a climb. And that climb means that actually when we get to the top we can make the airfield down in the lower right. So a couple more thermals pitch up. There's nothing beyond there going to the turn point at the moment, so we can safely push on because we know that if that second thermal doesn't work, our plan D means we're going to terminate our cross country and go and land at that field. We're not going to press on to the other turn point at the moment because the weather doesn't look good enough and it's just foolhardy. There's no bonus points for landing in a field. However, as we make our progress along the leg, another thermal pitches up, and lo and behold, we can see that we can go a little bit further. But again, not enough height to make the TP and then run to that diversion airfield. So plan A is to climb at that thermal, but B or D, in fact, plan D is we're going to run to the airfield anyway, but at least we've made the effort to go a little bit further. But when we do climb there, we find that with a successful climb, actually we can make the turning point and we can continue after the turn point and make it safely to the airfield. So notice in all of this planning, there's a plan A, which is how we're going to try and stay airborne, and there's always a plan D, that we're going to land somewhere. Whether you have a plan B and C in between is entirely up to the circumstances of the day. Having turned that turn point, though, we find there's another thermal and we can climb up here, and that's great. So we climb up there and we can push on to our task, and maybe, if necessary, push on the task in the way that we have been going, or again, if it all goes badly, we can still go land at that airfield. So those are sort of the basic, simple decisions we're making as we run along. 1, how do we stay airborne? 2, if we can't stay airborne, where am I going to land? And now I can push confidently on if I know I'm going to land somewhere safe. One of the planning tools we can use is RASP, and this is a real useful planning tool. On this screen here, we've selected the glider in the orange block there. We've also selected our planned start time, and we're also saying we've got no ballast, and we give a notional circling rate of descent and so on. In the bottom orange block is the task that we have selected. When we go a little bit further into the RASP for this task, then what we've said is here we're going to start at 12:30, and it's saying each leg there, lower down, the block of numbers at the bottom there, it's telling you the start and finish time of each of those legs. It shows you the distance of each leg, and also the performance expected instead of climb, headwind, tailwind components, and in fact the block speed is put in there as well. But just bear in mind you put your type of glider in and whether you've got ballast or not. This is good in as much as it tells you whether the task is possible, and it also gives you an indication as you're flying whether you're keeping up to the plan or not. Of course, you have to understand that you're assumed that you will be at the same height at each turning point. So there's no point being high at the start and being very low at the first turning point and then thinking you're maintaining on time because you've turned as per time. The other little aspect is what else you can do with this. So you can declare a later start time and an earlier start time than that and see if it is possible on both those times. Firstly, if it's earlier, well, that means that you can get airborne, so if you happen to get airborne early, you can still set off and that's fine. More importantly, by seeing if you set off an hour later, if you can still get round, that arguably gives you a buffer that if you start on the original time, you've still got an hour spare. So if you're a little bit late round the task or a little bit slow, actually it's not too much of a worry because according to the forecast, you should be able to get round. The question though lies is why are you a bit slow? Are you slow? Or are the conditions not quite as good as forecast? But that's for a decision for you to make at the time. But the point is that it does give you a good idea of what you should achieve. In reality, if RASP is accurate, then you should beat the RASP times. So if you really want a target to see if you're doing well, beat RASP times. So it's a bit like beating the tom-tom of time of arrival. Okay. Here's another little diagram. This is from the BGA website then, okay, the planning page. Of course, technology and websites and information may change. I can only tell you how it is at the moment. But here it shows a little diagram of turning points and how it fits on the map and so on. Here again is RASP. Bear in mind that the mathematics in RASP finishes at 7 o'clock in the evening. So in midsummer, it may well be that the forecast is that instability is still quite good at 7 o'clock in the evening. So it will continue to maintain that 3 knots rate of climb all the way to midnight. And so it said, oh, well, you can do this task and you'll land at 11 o'clock at night. Well, no, stand by. Okay, so be very cautious, shall I say, if you're on a very big 750 or 1,000 kilometre task and the day is stunning. Be wary of you can get back and home at 8 o'clock or 8:30. That may not be correct. Here we have a forecast of a high pressure over the middle of the country, and we can see that obviously if we could go around London, this example, then it would make huge more sense to fly the large task clockwise around this high pressure, so you always have a tailwind rather than anti-clockwise have a permanent headwind. We can get lattice streeting and convergence. So on here, we can see some lattice streeting out to the east of Wales there. You've got north-south streeting down to the south and north in the Midlands and towards London. You've got east-west streeting with a bit of north-south streeting in the middle there, just north of Milton Keynes. But equally significant is the bright yellow out to the east there, over Norfolk, and that is the convergence of the sea breeze coming in. And you can see that is a very powerful convergence. As we look at the time, it says 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So now we have a look at an hour later how it's changed. And we can see that the streeting is still there. It's changed into a bit of a ripple out to the east, and that sea breeze has moved further in. And again, that sea breeze continuing to develop, looking very, very strong. And of course, that would be perfect to plan. This is 4 o'clock in the afternoon, so it would be perfect to be planning to come back down along that sea breeze, and you would charge along for miles and miles and miles at great speed. So that's a very useful planning tool. Bear in mind that this was forecast the night before, and sure enough, it did happen. And there we go at 5 o'clock. And here we go at 7 o'clock. Wow, what a fantastic day that was. Shame you can't fly through London, that's all. Okay, skill drills, mini training tasks. So here we've got 2 turning points, in this particular case indicating east and west of the airfield, no more than 10 kilometres away. Keep it as a visual feature as well, and you're just doing shuttle runs. So it's not a specific turning point, it's a line to jump across. So you're 10 kilometres upwind or 10 kilometres downwind, and then you just swap over and go the other way. So rather than just blindly and blandly going upwind and downwind a little bit, give yourself a little bit of a target. Obviously, especially downwind, you're going to have a minimum height. But again, as you're going downwind, it's good like a downwind turning point. You'll realise that as you climb, you're drifting towards the turning point, and it will teach you how to try and gauge a climb to a downwind turning point, because you want to be as high as possible over that turning point before you head into wind. Meanwhile, into wind turning points, yeah, you want to be a little bit lower. So again, it might give you the confidence to push in a little bit lower than you would otherwise have gone into an upwind turning point later on. Just modifying it slightly then, you can have a crosswind track then. So in this case, I've given a north and a south line. And then after that, give yourself more than one turning point so you can best use the weather which is available. Skill drills, training exercises. When can you do this? Well, when you have a low cloud base. Notionally, we have a 3,500 foot cloud base for sensible, productive cross-country in the UK. But obviously, if it's much below 3,000 feet, it's really starting to give you a bit of a trouble, because the thermals are not so strong, and you tend to not have so much time to, or choices of thermals to pick as you go en route. Or it could be a bit of a low inversion, so you're still practicing the techniques across country, but the weather is not ideal to go too far from home. Another option, very common in the UK, is where you only get a couple of hours of a weather window, or you have a time limit for the area. You've got to get home. It's a bit late in the evening. The cold front went through late, and you just end up with a bit of evening weather from 4 o'clock to 6 o'clock or something like that. You could always make a club mini task of 35 kilometres, for example, which any and every glider virtually can use from the K13 upwards. And everyone can do it and declare it as a local mini task. TPs, no more than 10 kilometres away, really, maybe 20 kilometres max if the weather is much better. This allows lower performance machines to go a little bit further afield safely. And of course, you can always do laps. So here we have a training triangle, and this is in the task on the BGA website as well. But you can make it square or slightly circular, whatever your club feels is appropriate for your area and the gliders that you have in the club fleet. And I'd say specifically the club fleet of gliders as opposed to the private owners. Practice tasks then. Here we go. With the home and finish, you're going to set off probably on a start point that's slightly remote from the overhead and slightly downwind. So off you start and you rattle off to the east in this diagram. And on the map, we know there are two known safe airfields. So what we've done is turn points near to those airfields, but not over them, and we can do a little bit of a circuit like this. And that could be the whole task of here. If each leg is, say, 20 kilometres long, 20, 40, 60, 80, 100, so you've got a 100-kilometre task there, and you are never outside glide range of any airfield. Just because the BGA certificates are at 100 kilometres and 300 and 500 and 750 doesn't mean you have to push yourself out to a distance which doesn't favour this. A little bit shorter will do. It only matters when you're trying to fly a flight that gives you that qualification. The rest of the time it's really irrelevant. So, bearing in mind that you are quite reasonably allowed to thermal down to 600 feet at your local airfield, then it would make huge sense to plan to use and fly a route such that you can always glide to and arrive at an appropriate landing site at 600 feet, rather than juggle with the open countryside. In this way, you can avoid the 6 Ps and concentrate on the gliding and not the 5 S's. Tasking 20-kilometre legs then. So here we have our wind from the north, and we're going to have a line to cross which is 12 kilometres upwind and 8 kilometres downwind. In that way then the height needed as a safe height to run home will probably be similar. Again, you can change it for the day. It might be 13 and 7 or 11 and 9. And what you're practicing in this particular case is block speeds. You'll find quite surprising how performance is good at speed on modern glass gliders. Of course, we're not just flying block speeds, but we're determining exactly when we should climb. So on this particular case, we can see we've flown straight up north to the top of the screen. We decided to go round that turning point, and this time we're using the right, bottom right turning point. So we cut across to a thermal, which will give us a climb to which by the time we get to the top will be on that bottom right turning point. So we're just learning efficiency. We're not trying to, when we go cross country, it seems pointless to make the task bigger than the task is. You get no extra points for going further afield. We can do it into wind and downwind, and then we can also do it crosswind. Of course, crosswinds are considerably more difficult than a lot of people might think, and especially when there's quite a strong wind of 20 knots or so. So we are always battling the wind, whichever way we go. So when we do this crosswind, we're always battling to counter the drift that we have suffered whilst we climbed. Cat's cradle then. A cat's cradle is any combination of turning points, generally less than 10 kilometers away, but we're going to do a 140 kilometer task. So here we go. We've decided to go on that kind of a scenic route and then get home. There you go, 140 kilometers. Well, that wasn't too hard, was it? But you can do any turning points you like. The difference is it's a bit more difficult to, I'm going to suggest, to put into modern sat-nav systems, which again is why I suggest you use notionally visual features around your airfield. And the vast majority of clubs have got features that they know that are just 10 kilometers or so away that they can use as turning points. The 48-kilometer triangle trainer, which has a task of 10 kilometers, notional radius 9.5 kilometers away. So, what's good about it? Well, it's a fixed course. The maximum distance away from base is 9 kilometers. And you can use it as a teaching exercise or as a practice. It helps map route planning, sat-nav aid, the LX or the UDI, whatever you use in that respect. It teaches you a start, the turn points, decision-making into wind, crosswind and downwind, and of course a final glide. So there you go, the total distance of 3 turning points, 68 kilometers. It requires a launch at about 7,000 feet for something like a K-21. 3 knots of climbing, 20 minutes climbing, total tower, 1 hour, and 2 turning points. If you only do 2 turning points, you've done 50 kilometers. So from an exercise point of view, as a training exercise, you never lose your 2-seater in a field, but you have taught somebody, or they have demonstrated, that they can fly a cross-country. The 48 triangle trainer task, less than 10 kilometer radius then, so there's my fixed course, setting off, going around and coming home. Of course, the fixed task, this is commonly known as a racing task. There's nothing new in this particular method of tasking. We have a start. Bear in mind that the start for a qualifying BJ certificate is not that start sector like that. But you have specific half-kilometer turning points to go around and you get home. What do? Well, I have a whole book like this, and these are from the BGA planning of the ladder. I have my task set. There's about 100 of them or so, everything from 50 kilometers to 1,000 kilometers. Up the top left is a print off of a RASP, of a spine rather, of airspace, and underneath all of this lot is the map, okay, which we fly with. And we mark it up, mark the route on the map. whilst it's quite easy to say, yes, we've got all the route and airspace in our sat-nav systems, when the electrics fail, it's usually useful if we have a map. So there we go. BGA planner, there's the spine, and there's the map. There is no reason why you don't plan on using enhanced option at your turning points. And these enhanced options are really put in there in competition flying if we anticipate showery activity to make the competition fair. But that's the whole point. It makes it fair. To not turn at the half-kilometre circle, but at the D, which is on there, means we actually fly an extra up to 1 kilometre on each turning point. But if that means that we're not jeopardising our task and ending up in Farmer Brown's field, and that we can competently fly to and climb and still go into that D sector and then on, we will have done the task that we set out to do. So options here are to turn either at the half-kilometre barrel or within the semicircle, which has got a 10-kilometre radius.